Ah, yes, the day before Thanksgiving here on a rivalry week. 1 day till Turkey Day, 2 days until Black Friday, big football day, and then, of course, right after that on Saturday, the game of the season, the one that we have built this entire season for, number 15, South Carolina in the college football playoff poll, as unveiled last night. Number 12, Clemson. Seemingly, maybe not a play-in game for the college football playoff, though it very well could be. It's certainly a college football playoff eliminator. That one I think we know with a little more definitive authority. I'm Elijah Campbell here. No Jay Phillips today. He's got the day off, so I'll be rocking with you up until 5:30 until Derek Scott and Judge Manning get you ready for the game at 6 between the South Carolina men's basketball team taking on Virginia Tech, and quite frankly, is a game they have to have. They cannot leave Fort Myers 0-2 if they want to feel good about building any type of at-large bid for the NCAA tournament. I'll talk about that more later on in the show. My man Alan Cole from Gamecocks Scoop going to join me at 4:30 and hang out for a couple segments. We obviously will have a lot to talk with Alan in regards to this big game against Clemson on Saturday, the college football rankings, what this game means for the college football rankings, and what this will do for the winner of this game, and a whole lot more. And we'll also be talking men's and women's basketball as well. So a whole lot to get into with Alan as we get ready for a massive football weekend. We'll go ahead and start off by talking about the college football rankings. The thing that gets everybody fired up in the world of sports. Everybody has at least some type of gripe with this thing every week. And a lot of them, I think, are legitimate. Anytime you have a committee made up of humans who are flawed by nature, are going to rank things that people aren't going to agree with. It's a very subjective process. Right now, when I looked at it last night, I didn't have a ton of things that I looked at and got repulsed by, right? Like Oregon at 1 makes sense. So does Ohio State at number 2 for me. And a lot of people are still up in arms about Texas being at number 3. And I understand the angle of maybe not having a banner win to really hang their hat on. Like if you just go back and look at all their wins against Power 4 opponents, it's Kentucky, Mississippi State, Oklahoma, Florida, Vanderbilt, Michigan, and Arkansas. They're not quite eye-popping wins, especially with how some of those teams fared this season. Granted, at the beginning of the year, I think you could have assumed a win against Oklahoma and, really just Oklahoma and Michigan. I forgot about Michigan. Oklahoma and Michigan would probably be considered really good wins. I think people had a lot higher hopes for Michigan, considering they were an AP top 10 team coming into the season. And then with Oklahoma, there was still a good chance that people believed that they could have fought for contention in the SEC. And that clearly hasn't been the case for either of those programs this year. So winning against Michigan on the road, the Big House, in the manner they did, and beating Oklahoma in the manner they did, isn't as impressive here as we stand on November 27th as it might have been back in July at SEC Media Days. But the thing about Texas is they're still winning those games by a lot of points, man. An average of 19 points per game, so almost 3 touchdowns. And they have complete control in all of these games. And look no further than ESPN's game control rating that has them number 3, English, Elijah. Have a rating of 3 in the country. So unlike your Alabamas, your Ole Misses, Tennessees, even your Miamis, they simply take care of business. I'm fine with Penn State, Notre Dame, mostly considering their margin for error has completely been eliminated with their losses. Yes, Penn State, outside of Ohio State, doesn't have a ton of banner wins either, but they take care of business for the most part. I know they played close against Minnesota, but hey, guess what? They won. They played a 6-4 opponent on the road, and they won. There are teams in the SEC that play 6-5 opponents or 5-5 opponents on the road this past weekend and lost. I'm cool with the committee rewarding winners. I'm cool with that. I can't get too bent out of shape about that. And I get what people say about Notre Dame too. The loss to Northern Illinois is as close to a disqualifying single loss as you could possibly have in college football. I get it. But ever since that loss, they're winning their Power 4 conference games by an average of 39 points a game. 39. They are eviscerating people right now. And then they gave Navy and Army their first losses of the year by 37 and 35 points respectively. So not only have they been beating those teams, they're doing it in impressive fashion. There's some style points here. And the one thing I want to point out before we get into the SEC portion, before we get into South Carolina's portion, and what a win against Clemson can mean in the grand scheme of the college football playoff and what it could do to their chances. And we'll get into more of the Clemson-South Carolina game as it pertains to the football game itself. But as it pertains to a team like SMU, there was a tweet from someone I highly respect. I'm a big fan of J.D. Pickell. Love getting to meet him at SEC Media Days. I think he does a fantastic job at On3. But a tweet today where he said, if I'm the SEC and I'm seeing who's getting a playoff spot over some of our 3-loss teams that would ragdoll them, I may just go start my own playoff with the Big Ten. And I can only assume that he is alluding to SMU being in this bad boy at number 9. They're 10-1 on the season. But we should not address SMU like they're some JV squad, right? Because that's not the case. I think it's almost kind of shameful to say that they don't deserve an at-large spot. As things stand right now, as we are sitting here on November 27th, with the SMU Mustangs being 10-1, this is a team that is deserving of a playoff spot. They've only lost one game. That was to a BYU team that can still win the Big 12, mind you, could still be a champion and be a participator in this college football playoff. 7th in SP Plus offense, top 25 in defense, and they're 12th in the FPI, 11th in game control. They rank really well in the metrics that are being used to sort these teams. They also have 4 wins over teams, not just with winning records, or that are bowl eligible. 4 wins against teams that already have 7 wins. So I'll say that again. SMU has wins against teams, 4 teams rather, who already have 7 W's on the season. 5 wins against bowl eligible opponents. So the notion of the SEC and Big Ten having their own playoff because they would beat SMU like, quote, ragdolls in a hypothetical completely kills the spirit of football or sports in general. I don't like judging whether one team deserves to get in over the other because I think they would beat them by like a ragdoll on a neutral field in my mind. That's not where football's played. Football's not played in our brains. It's not played necessarily on paper. We have to judge what these teams actually do on a football field, and that type of thinking wouldn't have gotten us TCU beating Michigan in the college football playoff on New Year's Eve in 2022. Because a lot of people thought TCU getting into the playoff was undeserving, and that if they got on the field with a team like Michigan, who was very, very well good enough to win the national title that season, that they would be beaten like ragdolls. Well, that didn't necessarily happen because TCU scored 51 points and Michigan only scored 45. TCU won the football game. That's why we play these things on the field. So I don't have a ton of gripes. I can't get bent out of shape because teams like Ole Miss and Alabama, which while I do believe have 2 of maybe the 5 or 6 best rosters in college football, Ole Miss I think has maybe a top 3 roster in college football. I know football isn't played on paper. On paper, Ole Miss should be one of the 3 or 4 best teams in America. But the fact of the matter is they lost to a 7-loss team in Kentucky at home, and this past week they lost to a 5-loss Florida team on the road. To me, those are disqualifiers, even if you do beat a team like Georgia. But what does South Carolina have going for them as it pertains to Alabama and Ole Miss? I know when you look at the rankings, South Carolina sitting at 15, Ole Miss sitting at 14, Alabama sitting at 13, that these are teams in different trajectories, but it seems pretty clear and obvious that the reason Alabama and Ole Miss are still ahead of South Carolina is because of the head-to-heads. As we know here, that 2 of the 3 losses Carolina's had this season have come to Alabama and Ole Miss. But I'm not sweating that too much because of what you can control ahead of you. And what you can control ahead of you is winning on Saturday at Clemson, who is number 12 in the college football playoff poll. And that would carry a lot of weight, probably enough to be able to leapfrog Alabama and Ole Miss, maybe despite the head-to-head. So here's what South Carolina's got going for them, despite not having those head-to-head results. A win against Clemson would be a potential 6-game win streak, or it would be a 6-game win streak, with wins over 3 teams that are in the college football playoff top 25, especially if Missouri takes care of business against Arkansas. Then Missouri will be in the college football playoff top 25 next week. So that would be 3 of those wins that you have in that 6-game win streak against teams that are in this top 25. Alabama and Ole Miss not only have losses like you do, they have bad losses. I don't think you can chalk any of South Carolina's losses up as bad losses if we're qualifying them. Since their meeting, Alabama has lost to a 5-loss Oklahoma team, and Ole Miss has lost to a 5-loss Florida team. So for the season, Ole Miss has an embarrassing home loss to Kentucky, who, as we remember here, South Carolina crushed on the road, 31-6 for those who don't remember the specific score. Alabama has a road loss to Vanderbilt, who South Carolina also crushed on the road just this month, 28-7 for those who don't remember that score. So the head-to-head losses for both of these teams does suck, and it's a killer, especially as it pertains to Ole Miss, because it was a loss that we had here at home, and B, it was a total ass-kicking from start to finish, 27-3. But since that game, Carolina's only loss was on the road against, inconveniently, that same Alabama team that we're arguing against right now. But you can argue that the Alabama game was the beginning of a new Carolina offense, and that this team is a lot different now than it was against Ole Miss in the first week of October. And when you're looking at trajectory, it's hard to look at Alabama, Ole Miss, and South Carolina, those three teams, and say that Alabama and Ole Miss are on a better trajectory than South Carolina. Now, of course, I'm saying all this knowing damn well that you got to take care of business against Clemson. But when we're asking the question as to whether or not a win against Clemson on Saturday can get you into the college football playoff, this stuff becomes very relevant. And it becomes everything at this point. So yes, while Alabama and Ole Miss are ahead of you right now, I don't think this is the total ender, because the 6-game winning streak, I do believe, will carry, or would carry, in this hypothetical, a lot of weight as we get into a selection process. Like South Carolina, since that game against Ole Miss on October 5th, has clearly improved throughout the season and is a completely different team, especially on the offensive side of the ball, than they were at that point in time. And I don't think you can say the same about Alabama and Ole Miss. Ole Miss's offense has looked dynamic at times. They put up 60 billion points against Arkansas. They beat Georgia since that time, and that's a massive win. They did so in convincing fashion. But the losses are bad. They shot themselves in the foot against Florida. They completely melted down against Florida. Alabama went to Norman, Oklahoma, a place that you won by a lot, and got beat by a lot. They didn't score a touchdown that counted against Oklahoma. The Ryan Williams thing is a little shady. But even if that touchdown counted, you still lose by multiple scores. So that needs to be into consideration when fielding this team, or fielding this playoff bracket, rather. So it's a question to be posed. Does a win against Clemson, the way the college football playoff rankings are currently constructed, get you in to the playoff? And that was our poll question today at 1075 The Game on Twitter. Yes or no? Simple question. Will a win get you in the college football playoff? Got about 122 votes right now, and this will be up for about the next 20 hours. 46.7% say yes, that a win against Clemson will get you into the college football playoff. 53.3% say no, the win alone would not be enough to get you in to the biggest of dances at the college football stage. Well, I'll break that down. I'll answer this question myself on the other side, while also saying what has to go right for South Carolina to be able to get into the college football playoff, because the discussion is valid and it's a real possibility. We'll do that. We'll continue breaking down the Clemson game, including later on this hour, one big gaping flaw that Clemson has that I think South Carolina can take advantage of. And if they do, buddy, it's going to be a fun Saturday afternoon in the Upstate. I'm Elijah Campbell here on the Postgame Show. It's Rivalry Week presented by Columbia Craft. You're listening to the Postgame Show here on The Game. That's right. Rivalry Week is brought to you by our friends over at Columbia Craft on Green Street in the Vista. And I have a good suggestion as to what might make a trip to Columbia Craft even a little better. That is if you treat a friend or maybe even yourself to our craft beer card. It's the perfect holiday gift, especially for someone, if you're shopping for someone like me. Just an idea, just a hint. Just putting that in everybody's head. The craft beer card is now only $59. So you can save around $300. It sounds like a pretty good deal to me. So go to 1075.com and click on Sweet Deals, Sweels, if you will, and you will be able to have access to a craft beer card without having to beat Jay or myself in the Wild Card Showdown. We'll be doing that again on Friday as well. So and you can use that card at Columbia Craft. They are on it. Can't confirm. They are on the card, and you can get yourself some discounted beer or some free beer, actually. Not free because you buy the card, but you know what I mean. Save some money on some beer with my friends over at Columbia Craft, who's sponsoring Rivalry Week. We do have some calls lined up right now, 803-404-6100. I posed the question, does a win at Clemson on Saturday put the Gamecocks in the college football playoff? Yes or no? And pardon me if you call and I don't get to you, because it's just me in the studio right now. It's a one-man band. So if I'm not able to get to you, call back during commercial break. But my man Wooly did call back during the commercial break. He's on me right now. Wooly, what's up, brother?
Hey, man. All right, so Elijah, I got a good old joke for you.
I'm a sucker for a good old joke, brother.
All right, you know how to get to Clemson?
Oh, how?
North till you smell it, and west till you step in it.
That's what Rivalry Week is all about. That's good. That is what Rivalry Week is all about. If anybody else has any more Clemson jokes, too, please feel free to do what Wooly did and call in, because as someone still relatively new to the area, I've been here 2 years now, I need more creative ways to be able to trash talk Clemson. I'm still getting acclimated in that sense. So, yes, I'm writing that one down and saving it.
I got a prediction for you.
All right. How you think Saturday's going to go?
I think it's going to go well for the Gamecocks, and I believe we're going to win 35-18, 20, something like that.
Okay.
And I do believe we're going to make the CFP.
Do you think that the win alone would be enough to be able to leapfrog Ole Miss and Alabama and be able to squeeze into the playoff?
I do, brother. I'm a Gamecock, tried and true. And Gilbert, South Carolina loves you. My wife's a damn graduate. And guess what? Go Gamecocks. Later, brother.
Thank you, Willie. I appreciate the call, as always. And look, it's a fair question. If South Carolina wins, Willie's feeling confident that they win, especially if they win by the score that he says. If they win 35-18, or they win by multiple scores, you got to like your chances of impressing the committee enough to leapfrog Alabama and Ole Miss, especially considering Alabama and Ole Miss are both playing teams that they are double-digit favorites against, right? Like Alabama's an 11.5-point favorite against Auburn in the Iron Bowl at home, and if that game's close, which I expect it to be, actually, and I think there's a decent chance Auburn can actually go in there and win. I don't know exactly the headspace that Alabama team's in right now. That would be pretty significant to your chances of leapfrogging them. And then Ole Miss is a 26.5-point favorite against Mississippi State in the Egg Bowl. I don't think even a dominant win against Mississippi State in the Egg Bowl would be enough to convince the committee that they still belong in this playoff, despite their 3 losses, 2 of which come to teams with at least 5 losses. Just a reminder to everybody who Ole Miss has lost to this season. So a win this weekend would be the most impressive win out of those 3 teams in general, pretty easily, especially if you win by a couple scores. There's still some things that need to happen, though. So I voted no on this poll in terms of, will a win alone get the Gamecocks into the college football playoff? Because there's still some things that need to happen in general, right? One thing that would help would be that Auburn win at Alabama. Would help incredibly. I don't think it's a necessity because of what I just said earlier. Because Carolina winning at Clemson could be enough for them to leapfrog Alabama and Ole Miss. Because, again, beating up a banged-up Auburn, Mississippi State team or teams, might not be incredibly impressive to the committee, nor should it. But if there's any way that you can get help, you'll take it. And the most likely form of that help will be Auburn beating Alabama because, A, weird stuff happens in the Iron Bowl all the time, and I get that does in the Egg Bowl too, but Auburn's just a much better team than Mississippi State. Mississippi State's kind of been the village bicycle in the SEC. Everybody gets a ride, everybody gets a win. And that's kind of what I expect to happen on, whenever those two teams play on Friday. But it can make things much easier. Not a necessity that Auburn beats Alabama, but it helps. Looking into the ACC, I think one thing that will help out South Carolina a lot is if Cal beats SMU or if Miami loses to Syracuse. You need a little bit of chaos there in the ACC. Because Miami losing to Syracuse will be most likely out of those two. But you do need the ACC runner-up to not have a shot to sneak their way in. In a world that South Carolina gets in the college football playoff, that will not coincide with a multiple-loss ACC team. I still think the ACC just gets one in. Really hesitant to see a scenario in which a 2-loss ACC team gets in unless they win their conference, right? I think that's what it would take to get a 2-loss ACC team into that this year. But the team with the best chance to do that would be Miami. Now, in regards to Cal's chances of beating SMU, I know on paper it looks unlikely. And I know I talked up SMU in that last segment because SMU's a really good football team. But Cal can get them. It's very possible. Cal has been in at least every game this season. I know they have 5 losses, but all 5 of those losses, every single one, have come in one-score games. Some of them in heartbreaking fashion. Some of you might remember that game that played late into the night earlier in the season when they hosted game day and played Miami, had a big lead, and completely blew it later in that game. I just think the likelihood of hanging around and making magic/chaos happen, basically depending on your point of view, is very high for Cal to beat SMU. You need a little bit of muddying of the waters there. SMU losing to Cal would automatically drop them out of the top 12 in the college football playoff, and who knows how far that would drop them. I think that would end up being a free fall in the college football playoff rankings. One thing that you definitely need to happen too is for Texas to beat Texas A&M. Because sometimes too much chaos can be a problem for a team in South Carolina's position. This is where we get into bid thievery territory, right? So Texas A&M, as we look right now, is clearly on the outside looking in when it comes to the college football playoff. They're at 20 right now. But a win against Texas would get them to Atlanta in the SEC championship game and a chance to win an auto bid against Georgia. And that trip alone won't be enough to get them in, might not be enough to get them in, because I do think a 4-loss team getting into the college football playoff is a pretty ludicrous proposition. And I think that does kind of hurt the spirit of a playoff if a team that has 4 losses is able to get themselves in. But I'm warning you right now, if A&M beats Texas and then loses to Georgia, which is a very likely thing to happen, the SEC will work 24/7 to make sure a team playing in its championship game is guaranteed a spot. I don't think Greg Sankey can afford for Lane Kiffin to be right in that playing in the college football or the SEC championship would hurt your chances of getting into the playoff. So if all of that happens, I highly doubt the committee drops Texas out of the top 12, even though they might be deserving of getting dropped out of the top 12. I personally, as someone who would be thrilled to see South Carolina in the college football playoff, do not want to see what a decision between Texas and South Carolina will look like at the end of the day if those are the two teams fighting for the last spot. I don't want to see that. Because at the end of the day, all of this is just to say that Texas A&M will be nothing but a bid thief to the likes that we've really only seen in college basketball. Like when a bubble team loses its at-large chances of getting into the big dance because a team that's like 500 on the season in a Power 4 league wins its conference tournament. Like what NC State did this past year when they made a miraculous run in the ACC tournament to steal a bid pretty much from an Indiana State team that only lost like 3 or 4 games all season long. That type of bid thievery is something that we could be set up for if A&M beats Texas. That's the ultimate chaos spot. But there's one more SEC game on over the weekend, I believe it's on Saturday, that will make a world of difference. I'll tell you what that is when the postgame show continues. Continuing the discussion of the college football playoff, South Carolina's ranking, and what needs to happen for a win against Clemson to help get them into the college football playoff. A whole lot to get into today. We'll go ahead and we're taking your calls as well. 803-404-6100. And a reminder, if I don't answer during the segment, it's because I'm talking and, can't answer your phone until a commercial break because it's just your boy here in the studio. No Jay Phillips today. I'm Elijah Campbell, taking you up until 5:30 whenever we get to pregame for South Carolina against Virginia Tech on the hardwood in men's hoops. We'll go back out to our phone lines right now. My man Justin is on the line with me right now. Justin, thanks for calling in, brother. What you got for me?
How you doing, Elijah?
I'm fantastic, man. Excited for this game.
Yeah, me too, Elijah. Hey, Elijah, I got to say something, man. If we beat Clemson, but we got to beat these teams, but we can't let Clemson go to no playoffs. we got to get our time to shine, man. Look, we beat good wet teams, Missouri, Texas A&M. Those are the two teams we beat. First year ever to beat those two teams in the same conference.
Yeah, and those are big wins. Thanks for your call as always, Justin. And that's a good point that you have some really good wins on the resume, and that's what makes your resume maybe even more favorable to teams that beat you, right? And I know that sounds crazy because I'm the biggest proponent of head-to-head that you could possibly have. I want all these games to matter. I want all the games in September to matter, as same as the ones that are played in November, right? But despite losing to Ole Miss and Alabama, you do have maybe a resume advantage that a lot of the teams they lost to, like Kentucky, for instance, for Ole Miss. You went to Kentucky and you beat them over the head with a 2x4 for 4 quarters and beat them 31-6. For like Vanderbilt, Alabama went to Vanderbilt. You went to that same stadium, that same half-built stadium, and beat Vanderbilt like a drum by 3 touchdowns, specifically. You beat them pretty good, and that matters a lot. So when you look at the common foe thing, I think there's a really good chance or a really good angle to say that South Carolina would deserve being in over those two teams. And if you don't look at the head-to-head, you look at South Carolina's won 6 straight with visible improvement throughout the season, whereas Ole Miss and Alabama have certainly taken a dip and have declined since then. In last segment, though, I was kind of breaking down some things that need to happen for South Carolina to be able to help them get in. So let's just say in this hypothetical, you beat Clemson on Saturday. That's first things first, right? Players don't need to be thinking about this. Coaches don't need to be thinking about this, but us fans and media can because, well, that's our jobs. That's what we do. It's fun to look ahead. But what other things do you need to root for if South Carolina goes into Clemson, gets a win, leaves victorious? What do you need to root for on Saturday night? And a couple of our texters have beat me to it, and I got to credit you. There's one nameless texter and KT from Lexington who have beaten me to it in terms of what the most important thing is that needs to happen on Saturday to ensure your chances of getting in. The nameless texter says we need Vanderbilt to beat Tennessee also. KT from Lexington says the most help would be Vandy beating Tennessee. And I agree. Most importantly, what needs to happen for South Carolina to be able to get into this playoff is Vanderbilt beating Tennessee. Because a Tennessee loss to a 5-loss Vanderbilt team would be all but disqualifying for the Vols, right? Like the loss would be their second in 3 weeks, which doesn't necessarily indicate a team is playing their best at the right time. And that offense shouldn't pass anyone's quote-unquote eye test. Like the common foe factor does favor South Carolina heavily, even with Tennessee beating Alabama, right? For instance, South Carolina smacked up Vanderbilt on the road by 3 touchdowns, beat Oklahoma on the road in a way more convincing fashion than what Tennessee did. Remember, Tennessee had to smother the game out basically by playing Iowa ball in the second half of that game, only won by 10. South Carolina went to Oklahoma, and that bad boy was a 3-touchdown deficit by the time we got to our second commercial break. And then when you look at Kentucky, a team that played both Carolina and Tennessee, Carolina beat Kentucky on the road 31-6 in a game that wasn't necessarily close and that Kentucky could not move the ball at all against the Gamecocks. Yes, Tennessee won by 10 points, but they struggled a little bit. It took a lot more effort out of Tennessee to beat Kentucky than it did for Carolina to beat Kentucky. And that's if we're just using the common foe factor. I think some of those wins that South Carolina has over common opponents as opposed to Tennessee is more impressive than Tennessee beating Alabama, especially considering that happened last month. Something to look at. I think out of all the things that have to happen for South Carolina to be able to get themselves into the college football playoff, you're going to have some help, specifically maybe from Vanderbilt. Now, when ranking these, I think maybe Vanderbilt beating Tennessee is one thing, and that's really possible too. I think this is probably the most excited the Vanderbilt fan base has been to play Tennessee in a long time because Diego Pavia can make a lot of stuff happen, and Vanderbilt oftentimes doesn't beat themselves. Tennessee's offense this year has beaten them. It beat them against Arkansas. That loss they had at Arkansas was because they could not move the ball. They had a 14-3 lead and blew it because they couldn't string first downs together. They lost the game against Georgia because even when they got back into the game, they couldn't get off the field on third down. A loss to Vanderbilt would definitely be a disqualifier. And then you would look at where Tennessee's at in the rankings right now, which is at 8. If Texas loses to A&M, it's going to get really hairy. But South Carolina would have a better resume than Texas would if Texas loses to Texas A&M. So a lot of things have to happen. And in a year that is the most like 2007 in terms of unpredictability and chaos that we've seen in college football, anything can happen. But of course, the most important thing is beating Clemson. I'll talk about that on the other side as well, including one fatal flaw that Clemson has that I think might rear its ugly head and would be incredibly advantageous for the South Carolina Gamecocks on Saturday. I'll tell you what that is and what you'll need to watch for on Saturday when the postgame show returns. game that was. Still remember watching that game a long time ago. Fantastic win. Dylan Thompson coming in after Connor Shaw got hurt against Wofford the week before, throwing 3 touchdowns, 300-plus yards, too. Massive game. But, man, when putting together the video that we posted at 107.5 The Game on Twitter, when kind of remembering that game, I think I watched the replay of that DJ Swearinger hit at least 20 times. And it got fun with each single viewing. Never gets old. 803-404-6100. I'm Elijah Campbell here on the Postgame Show, taking you up until 5:30 till we kick off coverage, or rather tip-off coverage, because it's a basketball game between South Carolina and Virginia Tech, a game that I feel like the Gamecocks men's basketball team absolutely has to have to salvage the non-conference slate. We'll go ahead and get back to the phone line. Sebastian's on the line right now. Sebastian, thank you for calling.
Thank you. That's what I wanted to start off with. Just thank you guys for everything that y'all do, and thank you, Beamer, for instilling pride injury to their starting quarterback before postseason. And then will they take that into consideration with the LSU loss and Sellers being out before half?
Sebastian, thanks for your call. Yeah, that's a really good question. That's one to think about too, and that's the tricky thing to answer, right? Is we haven't gotten a lot of consistency from Ward Manuel in terms of what this committee is looking for, right? Like, I like to make fun of Kirby Smart for his answer after, the win against Tennessee. We don't know what the committee's looking for. We don't know what the committee's looking for. And I like to joke or make the joke of, hey, maybe don't lose multiple games in a season. Maybe that's what they're looking for. But that's a really good point that Sebastian made in terms of what happened to Florida State last year, where they were kept out of a playoff despite being 13-0 and winning a Power 4 conference because their starting quarterback was hurt and he was not going to be playing, and they felt like that Florida State team was a completely different team. I would like to think there's a lot of nuance when looking at the LSU loss in the committee, even refereeing aside. And I get that's the main talking point that everybody wants to hit at when we talk about that game. But I think the bigger factor in losing that game was Lenoris getting hurt and not being able to play more than that one snap in the second half, because he was dealing against that LSU team. And as we've seen this year, LSU has a hard time defending against quarterbacks who are mobile. We saw what Jalen Milroe did to him for the entirety of that game just earlier this month. I think that's one thing that you'd have to take into consideration in terms of the nuance of some of these games, some of these wins and losses, is that Lenoris Sellers not playing in the second half against LSU made a world of difference, especially in a third quarter where LSU ran 25 offensive plays and you only ran 6 because you couldn't keep your offense on the field. That made a big difference. And I think that's something that should be taken into consideration. But what should be taken into consideration, and what actually is taken into consideration, unfortunately, are two things that don't always match or align when it comes to a committee full of people deciding to field a playoff bracket. I think it's a good point, and I think that's one where if they do look at that game with the appropriate amount of nuance, they're not going to hold that one against South Carolina as much when evaluating them against other teams like Alabama and Ole Miss, who have lost games where their quarterback was perfectly healthy for every single game that they played. I think that is something that should be taken into consideration. I just don't know if they do. But I'd like to think they learned from their mistake last year. We'll go and get back to the phone line. Zach's on the line with us right now. Zach, thanks for calling in. What's up, brother?
Hey, man, thanks for taking my call. Go Gamecocks. Just the mention of what we need to pull for the Gamecocks to slip in. Miami losing this week kind of opens the back door for even when we beat Clemson, in this hypothetical, for them to Clemson and them get into the ACC championship and win. And so that's an ACC spot, and then a SMU team that kind of to your point about the SEC champion losing, it's probably across the board. You assume that loss hurts way less than a regular season loss, and then you got SMU sitting at 10 or 11-2 against our resume of 9-3, and it kind of at the very least puts us up in the air against them. Interested to hear what your thoughts are here. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely, and I love that you brought that up, and I'll address this before we get to the break. Clemson backdooring their way into an ACC championship game would be considered some bid thievery by my definition, because that's going to take away from either SMU or Miami. SMU might have a chance if it's SMU and Miami beats them, and vice versa, right? Because that's the only way I think you can get a 2-loss ACC team into this thing. And I think if Clemson backdoors their way into the ACC title game, if they lose in that title game to either Miami or SMU, I don't think they're getting in. But Clemson backdooring their way into the college football playoff by virtue of winning the ACC, because I do think if Clemson played Miami, Clemson would win. Or if they played SMU, I still like Clemson's chances of winning that game, because Clemson, at the end of the day, is still a really good football team. I think if that gets them in, then South Carolina's their entire resume is completely bolstered in a really good way, right? So if it comes down to an 11-2 SMU team against a South Carolina team, yes, SMU has a lot of positives that I've already mentioned on the show that I like about their resume, and that's having 4 wins against teams that have already won 7 games. They could potentially have 3 or 4 wins against teams that have won 8, which is a good thing for SMU's resume. However, when comparing an 11-2 SMU schedule and the outcomes of what happened in South Carolina would have a win against Clemson, who in this scenario would be in the college football playoff, and then they would also have other wins against Texas A&M, who could potentially be playing for the SEC title, and against Missouri, who, barring a shocking loss to Arkansas, anything can happen, also being in the college football playoff. So you would have as many wins against teams in the college football playoff field, or in the college football playoff rankings, top 20, because I think if Missouri wins and A&M wins, they'll both be in the top 20. You'd have as many wins against teams in the top 21 of the college football playoff as SMU does against 7-win teams. So in that scenario, I actually think that bolsters South Carolina's chances of getting an at-large to the college football playoff. But it's a very interesting thought exercise as to how bid thievery will affect seeding this thing and fielding it. Hour number 2 coming up. We're going to do a big dive into this game on Saturday, what Carolina needs to do to win. We'll be back in a bit. Hour number 2 of the Postgame Show. I'm Elijah Campbell taking you up until 5:30. No Jay Phillips today. A much-deserved day off. He's got all of his children in town here for Thanksgiving, and they got a lot to prepare for. Thankfully, I don't have as much to prepare for. Not as stressful as Thanksgiving prep as it is for Jay Phillips. So I'll take care of the show today. Running up until 5:30, hanging out with you guys, my friends, talking Clemson, Carolina, talking college football playoff, talking about what has to happen for South Carolina to be able to get into the college football playoff because, believe it or not, it's November 27th, and we're talking about the South Carolina Gamecocks having a pathway to playing in the college football playoff. Didn't think we'd be doing that back when we were at SEC Media Days in July. But first, you got to beat Clemson, right? It's a massive game on Saturday. Clemson's ahead of you in the college football playoff, so that's one real reason to want to win this game outside of it being the big rivalry game in this entire state. And there's a way that can happen. I mentioned it in the last hour. I wanted to get to some of the phone calls too, because I like talking to you guys. I appreciate you all listening in and calling. Got a couple of you on hold right now as well, so just hang in there. But I wanted to touch on this first. There's one thing that I feel like we haven't talked about enough when it pertains to Carolina Clemson on Saturday that might be a bigger factor than anybody anticipated. Like yesterday, Jay and I talked a lot about the offensive side of the ball, on what you're going to have to do against a good Clemson defense to be able to score enough points to win. The health of Josh Simon is paramount to Carolina's chances of winning. I'd even say Michael Smith too, because so much of what this offense does has to do with the work that the tight ends do. And then defensively, how do you stop Clemson's running game? This is an offense for the Tigers that runs for almost 200 yards a game. That's what they do. Phil Moff was a tough back to bring down. Cade Klubnik's got some wheels of his own. You saw that's how they won the Pittsburgh game with a 50-yard rushing touchdown in the game's final minutes. But we haven't really discussed, at least on our program, the special teams side. But there's one thing that Clemson has really failed to do on special teams this year that could be the difference between walking out of Death Valley with a win or with a loss. When preparing for this show today, I'm watching a lot more Clemson film throughout the entirety of the season, doing a refresher on certain parts of their team, and I noticed they've had a lot of kicks blocked this year. Their field goal protect unit has really struggled. And then when reading an article from Chappell Fowler from the State, who covers Clemson for him, he made sure to mention after the Virginia Tech game where they had a field goal blocked. So as of November 9th, Clemson was leading the country in kicks blocked. I don't need to remind you who's coaching the South Carolina Gamecocks. That's Shane Beamer, who cut his teeth in the coaching industry, coaching special teams, whose father, Frank Beamer, made a living of winning games at Virginia Tech by mastering the dark arts of special teams. South Carolina's got a good special teams unit. And when watching all of these block kicks, I went back and I found all 6 blocked kicks that Clemson has had this year to see if I could find any type of pattern. They had a block kick against Stanford, 2 block kicks against Florida State, 2 against Louisville, 1 against Virginia Tech. So I'll go back and look at all of these. The block at Virginia Tech, Dabo Swinney said after the game that the kick was low, and that was why it got blocked. But when you watch it, there was a big push up the middle, slightly to the left of the protection, right? Where Virginia Tech got enough push to be able to have one of those linemen get a big old paw up there and be able to hit the ball. Virginia Tech ran that in for a touchdown. It was a big score in that game. it wasn't enough for Virginia Tech to win the game because Clemson's defense, quite frankly, played lights out and made Kyron Drone see ghost. However, those were points that the Hokies desperately needed, and they got via a block kick. In the game against Stanford as a blocked extra point. In that one, it was right up the middle. There was not really much push on Stanford's special teams unit on that kick. The kick was pretty low. I would attribute that one to it just being a low kick. A lot of guys probably could have blocked that kick, right? But in Florida State and Louisville games is where you start seeing a pattern. So let's go to the Florida State game, right? Game at Florida State. The first block against the Seminoles, or for the Seminoles against the Tigers, was a free run off the left edge. The guy who was at the edge of the line of scrimmage was untouched, made his way to the kicker easily, blocked the kick. Florida State gets the ball. The second kick, also on the left side of the protection, was an absolute whiff on one of the Clemson offensive linemen. Completely whiffed near off the left edge on a block, and that led to another block kick. So try to notice a pattern here. Against Louisville, the first block kick, also on the left side of the left side of the protection near the line of scrimmage. And it wasn't just one player that goofed for Clemson. It was a unit breakdown, a complete unit breakdown on the left side of the field goal protection. Louisville blocks the kick easy. The second block kick was another free run, just like the first one in the Florida State game, on the left side, not completely on the edge, but near the left side of the protection. A free run, a miscommunication on the field goal protection of Clemson, and Louisville gets a free run at that kick. And in that game, those 6 points could have made a whole lot of difference. I know Louisville ran up and down the field, and Clemson's problems probably extended a little beyond just field goal protection. But that made a massive difference in that game in terms of momentum shifts, in terms of just energy in that stadium. A game that Clemson lost at home to a Louisville team that, mind you, also has 4 losses this year. A team that I think if they play 10 times, I think Clemson beats Louisville 8 of those 10 times. But this was one of those 2 in my hypothetical here that Louisville would win. And it helped because they were able to help win this thing on special teams. That's something that when watching, I figured, if there's a pathway, there's a lot of pathways for South Carolina to be able to win this game. But when a team coached by Shane Beamer, who has excelled in special teams coaching, who has already shown this year they can block kicks, and he's got a special teams coordinator in Joe DeCamillis, who has been doing this in the NFL for a long time, I know they have to be watching that film and seeing that there is a pathway to be able to block some kicks. And we've joked all year long that the Lawyer Lisa Special Teams Contest might not be won by anybody because in that Special Teams Contest, free plug here, if South Carolina scores a special teams touchdown, one person will win, drawn to win. The pot is currently at $1,200. So if you haven't registered, I don't think I need to convince you any more so to register for the Lawyer Lisa Special Teams Contest, because if there is a unit in college football more prone to giving up blocked field goals, you'll have to show them to me, because Clemson has given up 6 blocked kicks this year. And I don't know if any of the teams they were tied second with have blocked a kick since then, but that's been an issue for their special teams unit all year. This is something that could come up big in a game that might be decided by one score. That might be decided by a field goal at the end of the game. Not here saying that it's going to happen, but when Clemson lines up for extra points or a field goal attempt, watch the left side of their protection, because this year it's broken down a few times. This year it's let them down a little bit. So in a year in which maybe Carolina hasn't gotten that special team score, this is going to be a unit that they're going to play on Saturday that might give them the best chance to do it. And I'm almost mad at myself now that I noticed this after Shane Beamer's presser, on Tuesday, where I asked him more so about the running game, because I do believe that a key to stopping Clemson will be to stop their running game. I do believe that if I'm Clemson, I'd be watching what happened in the Missouri game with Nate Noel running for 150 yards on basically a lot of stretch plays and outside zone, that I would probably try to replicate that, because you have the horses to do so. You have a great running back. You have a quarterback who's got some wheels of his own. That might be a pathway for them to win this game. So that's what I focused in on more. But maybe I should have focused in a little bit more on the special teams thing, just to see the look on his face, on what he might have running through his mind, on what tricks they might have up their sleeve to try to expose that. I found that to just be really interesting. Again, all on the left side. Out of the 6 block kicks, I counted 5 of them to be on the left side. The lone exception being Stanford, where really it was just a low kick, and the Stanford, special teams player that was standing near the long snapper just had the ball kicked into him, right? But the other 5 breakdowns or getting pushed around on the left side of the line of scrimmage. Found that to be really interesting as well. A lot of pathways, though, to end up winning this game for South Carolina. And I'll take all your calls, too. I see a lot of them lining up, but we'll go ahead and get to you here at the commercial break so I can get your names, and I'll be able to get to you as well. 803-404-6100. Also have plenty of people chiming in on the text line. A whole lot. I got to pull up one right here. I knew I was going to get this text at one point today, too, because in the first hour, we talked a lot about the college football playoff scenarios. Nameless texter says, can we just win Saturday before even mentioning the playoffs? Go Cox. To that, I'll respond, go Cox. But also, this is what we do. This is what we do in this industry, right? The college football playoff rankings are released. We debate them. We discuss them. And I try to give you a little something to add more juice to this game, as if I need to do that. This is one of the more highly anticipated Carolina-Clemson games in a long, long time, mostly because there are serious college football playoff implications on the line, even for Clemson, too. Clemson was able to pull a win out on Saturday, a win against a South Carolina team that came into this game winning 5 straight and is playing like one of the best teams in the SEC, would certainly be a case that they could make to the committee, especially if we have chaos in that top 12. But again, when watching this game Saturday, pay close attention, because I know I'll be, to the left side of Clemson's field goal protection, because there have been a lot of breakdowns this year. Maybe that is the difference in winning or losing. Maybe it's the difference in someone winning $1,200 next week if South Carolina capitalizes on that in scores like Virginia Tech did. Again, go to 1075thegame.com to sign up for the Lawyer Lisa Special Teams Contest. If there's any week to do it, I think this week might be it. This might be it. We'll go and take your calls and a whole lot more discussing what needs to happen for the South Carolina Gamecocks to be able to leave Death Valley on Saturday with a win and an outside shot at making the college football playoff. I'm Elijah Campbell. We'll be back here on The Game. Ah, yes, rivalry week continuing to go strong. I'm Elijah Campbell taking you up until 5:30. Coming up in the next segment, my man Alan Cole from Gamecock Scoop is going to join me. We're going to talk college football playoff, this big game on Saturday. Can the men's basketball team get it turned around against Virginia Tech tonight? Can the women's basketball team rebound from their first loss in 43 games against Iowa State tomorrow on Thanksgiving? And again, hope everybody has a great Thanksgiving. A very underrated holiday. Big sides guy here. Very excited to be able to consume a lot of food and not feel too terribly guilty about it. I know my friends at Columbia Secret for Weight Loss don't like to hear me say that, but you know what? I have learned enough from them to be able to bounce back from indulging and enjoying myself on Thanksgiving. Back to the phone lines, 803-404-6100. Thank you all for calling in during the commercial break. I got Joe on the line with me right now. Joe, happy Thanksgiving. Thanks for calling in, man.
Yes, sir. Happy Thanksgiving to you, man. Number one, it's nice to be in this conversation, at least have, outside shot. I don't think when we were 3-3, we would be talking about possible playoff scenarios for South Carolina at that point, but I think it really only comes down to a few scenarios. I mean, we'll take the least likely ones first, which would be Indiana losing to Purdue.
Mm-hmm.
These three games are all 20-plus spreads, so they're very unlikely. But if Georgia Tech, Mississippi State, or Purdue knocked off any one of those, then that's obviously a way to jump up. I think the other scenarios these are more favorable. Vandy beating Tennessee, I think they would drop enough, and with a convincing win against Clemson, we would go past them. Also, Auburn is a 12.5 spread. I think if they beat Alabama, that's another team we could jump. And finally, SMU. What needs to happen with SMU is they need to lose to California and then lose to Miami in the ACC championship game. And just to let Carolina fans know, we do not want Miami losing to Syracuse, because I believe if that's a close game and they lose to Syracuse, they will not drop out of the top 12. And if Clemson wins the ACC title, that will be 2 spots for the ACC, which right now I think there's a good chance there's only one. If SMU uses Miami, I think they're out.
I think so too.
But those are the far case scenarios. And another point is we're really probably going to have to get to the 11 seed, because I think the Big 12 is going to take the 12 seed slot, just because they're the weakest conference, and I think they will get in at 12. So it's a lot of different scenarios, but this is the last thing I'm going to end on. The two most detrimental plays for South Carolina this season were obviously the biggest one was the LSU, the callback of the pick six. That puts Carolina up by 11 with 6 minutes left. And obviously, we all disagree with that call. I think that personal fouls is something that needs to be looked at in terms of being reviewable. I'll give you another side note of that. In the Louisville-Stanford game, which Louisville magically lost with that personal foul, that was not a personal foul either. The guy gave him a baby shove after being on the sideline. So that's something that needs to be looked at. And the second detrimental play was with about 8 or 9 minutes left in the Alabama game. We had it 1st and 10 or on 30 after picking off Alabama and had the lead. And we fumbled the exchange with Sellers and Sanders on 1st and 10. I would love to have known what would happen had we been able to maintain a drive and take time off that and possibly score. But anyway, man, that's my 2 cents. Again, it's nice to have these conversations involving it has to be all kinds of crazy stuff has to happen. But, man, that just happened this past weekend. And last footnote, I do think we need – I don't care if we beat Clemson 2-0. I mean, I just want to beat them. But I do think a resounding victory, if that were in the cards, where we go in there and it's some kind of 34-13 type deal or something like that, I think that's going to really give us a possibility to jump somebody like Alabama Ole Miss, even though you're talking about losing the head-to-head. So. But again, Elijah, have a great Thanksgiving, man. Great show. Love the topics of conversation. You're doing an excellent job. Look forward to catching up with you next week, man.
Absolutely, Joe. Thanks for your call, man. Yeah, a lot to unpack there and a lot of really good points made as well. Specifically when it comes to the ACC, I thought Joe made a good point with Miami. I think if there is a 2-loss team in the ACC that gets an at-large? And again, that's a really big if. I don't think the committee maybe, once the season is all said and done, would look favorably at putting 2 ACC teams in. They could, because, I mean, really, Clemson, SMU, and Miami are all playoff caliber teams. I'll say it again, and I chose those words very specifically. Playoff caliber teams, all really good football teams. But in terms of like their schedule, I think, Miami might have a case with the win at Florida. I know Florida's a 5-loss team, but you look at the SEC teams that have lost to 5-loss teams, Ole Miss specifically going into Florida and losing, it showed that, that's a pretty good win for Miami. Not enough to, be the difference maker, but I do think that might be used in Miami's favor. Yeah, maybe the best case scenario is just having only one ACC team in, and that being the Miami Hurricanes. That might be it, or Clemson backdooring their way in, because Cal can very well beat SMU. I'm not putting that out of the realm of possibility at all, just because all 5 of Cal's losses this year have come in one-score games. So the likelihood that Cal has a chance to win the game with the last 5 minutes in the fourth quarter is very high. And that's me even being really high on SMU. Really like the Stangs this year. Rhett Lashley's done a phenomenal job coaching them. Even having to go to a quarterback change after the loss to BYU, and they've completely turned their season around and have played a lot of really good football. But the ACC is a very intriguing case study. I do think if SMU loses, Clemson backdoors their way in, regardless of result against South Carolina, because South Carolina's not in the ACC, and Carolina goes in there, and let's say they even beat Miami, I think you're then looking at 11-2 Miami versus 9-3 South Carolina, and maybe South Carolina gets in. I don't think that's a crazy thought. Maybe not likely. If I had to put a percentage index chance on that maybe Miami gets in 55% of the time to Carolina's 45%. I think that would be some really hotly debated discussion, considering Miami's loss came in the month of November and to a Georgia Tech team who is going to finish the season 7-5, unless they upset Georgia. Not very likely. So unless they do that, they're finishing the season 7-5. And that would be a loss. And then the loss to Clemson, a team that Carolina would be fresh off beating if they are to win and be in that conversation. And I think that would bode well for South Carolina in terms of comparing who goes in, who goes out between Miami and South Carolina if Miami doesn't end up getting that automatic bid into the college football playoff. That one is really intriguing. And I definitely agree with Joe's points, too. The plays that we're going to be looking at the end of the year, that if you don't get into the college football playoff and you do beat Clemson, that you're really going to feel ill when watching the personal foul against Kyle Kennard on the pick 6 against LSU. And then Lenora Sellers and Rocket kind of fumbling the exchange against Alabama after O'Donnell Fortune makes a fantastic play to get that interception when you're sitting on a 19-14 lead. I'm kind of in Joe's camp. I really would have liked to have seen what South Carolina could have done in terms of maybe melting more time off the clock in that game and maybe being able to secure an upset at Alabama, especially that one. Maybe that one more so than LSU, because now we're at a point right now, Alabama's 1 spot ahead of you, or maybe 2 spots ahead. Gotta pull that back up. Yeah, they are currently 2 spots ahead of you in the college football playoff ranking solely because of that final result. But nonetheless, you still have a shot ahead of you right now to be able to change a lot of things about how you view this season and giving yourself a chance to play some extra football. We'll go ahead and go to the phone lines again, 803-404-6200. My man Scott's on the line with me right now. Scott, thanks for calling in, man. Happy Thanksgiving. Hey, Scott, we got you. I hear a doorbell. Someone's got some food delivered. I'll let Scott attend to that. He's got bigger business afoot, bigger fish to fry. Sounds like he's got a house full, so hopefully Scott enjoys his Thanksgiving with his loved ones there. But, yeah, continuing to talk about the South Carolina-Clemson game, a lot of this is going to hinge, to me, on Josh Simon's health. And when we get Alan Cole on here in the next segment to talk about this game, I'm going to ask him about the read he's getting on the Josh Simon situation, because I feel pretty good about South Carolina's chances to be able to run the ball and be able to use their triple option attack to maybe take advantage of a Clemson run defense that hasn't looked its best in the last week. The Citadel did run for 288 yards on Clemson. They did pick up 5.2 yards per carry. And Shane Beamer did say that they might be looking at some of that because South Carolina runs maybe a more enhanced version of a triple option, right? And they've been doing that to perfection this year. I believe that's the reason why you ran it up on Texas A&M earlier this month, is because they couldn't stop your run game. You got whatever you wanted, and you hit on some massive explosive plays because you do run a really good variation of a triple option, and having Lenora Sellers at quarterback makes a world of difference right there. But Josh Simon's availability is going to be really big, mostly because of his role in the triple option, given his role as I don't want to say the third option, but kind of the leak out safety, easy button type option on that play, and his ability to block on the perimeter. Because in order to have a good triple option attack, you have to be able to block on the perimeter if Lenore decides to tuck and run. In the screen game, you got to be able to have guys block on the perimeter. I'll liken this back to the Vanderbilt game where Rocket Sanders scored on that explosive screen pass to basically put that game out of reach for good, where all 10 guys, or 9 guys, I guess, on blocking assignments on that play got a hat on a hat, and Rocket Sanders was able to score a lot easier than he would have without that assistance. Perimeter blocking is going to be really big in this game. Clemson's got a lot of really good tacklers, a lot of really good defensive players. The perimeter blocking has to be on point, and Josh Simon has been one of your better perimeter blockers. So that's one thing I'm going to ask Alan when we get him on. Again, Alan Cole, Gamecock Scoop, joining me here for the next few segments as you're listening to the postgame show, taking you up here till 5:30 on The Game. From the WIS Traffic Studios, I'm Elijah Campbell. The few accidents here to get to you that are causing some issues on the roadways, starting with one on Highway 1 at Augusta Road near Highway 16 and Beltline Boulevard, Highway 1 at Augusta Road, this time over at Parkland Road and Decker Boulevard. We also have one on Meadow Lake Drive near Porchester Drive. In Lexington County, we have an accident on 20 eastbound before Bush River Road near exit 63. And then near Kershaw County, we have one on 20 east at White Pond Road near exit 87. Today's show moving fast and furious, and as promised, my man Alan Cole on the line with me right now as we are both discussing this thrilling ending in Gonzaga, West Virginia. If you just have a spare TV, Gonzaga had a chance to win the game with 5 seconds left. Caleb Battle tries to draw a foul or kick the ball out. No cigar. That one's going to overtime. So a lot of exciting basketball going on today. But right now we're talking college football playoff. The South Carolina Gamecocks, their chances to get into the college football playoff, and a whole lot more. Alan, thanks for joining me, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. What a sentence that is, considering the conversations we were having in August, right?
right. Or even October. Let's move that fast forward to October 6th and 7th after that Ole Miss game where, you lose in pretty bad fashion. You get your tail kicked pretty bad. And, if I could have gone back in time and told myself in that press box watching that game that, hey, man, November 27th is going to be rolling around. You and Alan are going to be talking about what it takes to get South Carolina into the college football playoff. I would have slapped myself and told myself to get off the dope.
It's kind of surreal, honestly, to actually try to put this math together.
Yeah, it's crazy. But here we are. 15th in the college football playoff rankings. You're taking on number 12, your hated rival on Saturday. The possibility of chaos abound as Texas takes on Texas A&M as well for the first time in over a decade. A game that could have some bid thievery implications to it. A lot of other crazy things that can happen. Vanderbilt's best team in a long time has a chance to spoil it for Tennessee as well. A lot maybe has to go right, but we posted on our Twitter account today, Alan, as like our poll question of the day. Does a win against Clemson by itself, assuming all other favorites take care of business, get them into the college football playoff, yes or no? Your inclination on that would be?
I'm going to say no. You're at 15 right now. I think some people miss that you're not trying to get to 12 here, even though it's a 12-team playoff, because the way the auto bids work, the target line for an at-large right now is actually 10. So you're talking about jumping 5 spots, and obviously one of those would take care of itself if you beat Clemson. But no, I don't think a win by itself would do it. I think the head-to-head factors of Alabama and Ole Miss still plays a role here. I think you can help mitigate that if you won a 6 game in a row, but I'm not sure if you get rid of it completely. And yeah, you're going to need, like you said, a 1-bid ACC. You're going to need A&M to not steal an SEC bid, all that stuff. So I'm going to say no by itself.
Yeah, and that's the one thing, too, that I'm looking at when it came out that Ole Miss and Alabama were still ahead of South Carolina. I wasn't terribly surprised on the sole fact that they won the head-to-heads. So you can't be, I guess, too bitter that that's the case, right? Because all 3 teams have the same record. And South Carolina is a common opponent of both of them, and South Carolina lost to both of them. So I understand maybe being behind it. I tried to make the case in the first hour of the show today, Alan, too, that from a resume standpoint, you really do have, I feel like at least, a good chance to maybe even leapfrog them if you beat Clemson in convincing fashion. And even if Ole Miss and Alabama take care of business, just because of the recency of having 3 wins against 3 teams in the college football playoff top 25, and Alabama and Ole Miss kind of stumbling down the stretch too. Do you think that carries a lot of weight?
I think it's the scenario you just laid out where they go up there and, let's say they win by double digits, they go up there and blow them out. I think that does. You're talking about what would you have to do to make the committee say, you're playing so much better now than what happened in October doesn't matter. That's basically what we're talking about here. And I think that would help for sure. And I think the other thing, too, is this, for whatever reason, for whatever you want to look at, this committee really values Clemson. I mean, Clemson's at 12 right now. Clemson's above several SEC teams. Clemson is, I believe, they're the highest-ranked non-SEC 2-loss team right now, right?
I believe so.
So if you go on the road and beat a team that they already value, that in theory should mean they value you, right? We know that's not how it works necessarily, but I think maybe in a weird way, Clemson being where it is helps South Carolina.
Yeah, I think so too. And ultimately, you're trying to dive into the psyche of the college football playoff selection committee is kind of a fool's errand, but I think we can kind of try to piece together what's being valued bit by bit as we see the rankings kind of adjust over time. But obviously, the first thing you have to do to make any of this relevant is take care of business on Saturday. And that's what Coach Beamer and this team is focused on right now. I want to lead off with this game discussion, asking you about the feeling you have about Josh Simon's availability. Because before I got you on, I kind of laid out my thought process of Carolina will, must have Josh Simon to win because of how important he is in a triple option attack as being the passing threat, what he's done in the passing game, as well as his ability to block on the perimeter. He's a vital part of this offense and didn't play on Saturday against Wofford. Could very well be, precaution, but he was banged up a little bit at the end of the Missouri game. What's kind of the feel that you have on his injury situation?
I am not going to rule it out. I don't feel as good about it as I did earlier in the week, to be honest, just because, Shane Beamer, I think I asked him yesterday. He didn't really give an answer. You were there.
Yeah.
He didn't really give an update on the Prisma Health Injury Report, on his radio show last night either. And the more he doesn't mention it, the more I think it's because he doesn't want to mention it. Like you said, Jared Brown's going to play. He said, some of the defensive guys that got banged up last week are going to play. I don't want to rule it out, but I definitely think he's not 100% if he does play. And I think that does limit South Carolina. But you got to hope. I don't want to say they can't win the football game if he's not playing. I think it's a little bit premature.
Right.
But you were there last week with me. You saw Luke Doty play 50-some odd snaps. I don't think that's a sustainable way to live on offense.
Yeah. With as important as the tight end position is with this offense, because they're asked to do more than maybe just like a normal tight end, right? Because of the perimeter blocking responsibilities. It's one thing to use Luke Doty as a de facto tight end when all 3 of your tight ends are out against Wofford, right? To help block on the perimeter, to chip block and things like that. It's a whole other thing to ask him to do that against Clemson's front. Their defensive front, I would say, a wee bit bigger, a wee bit faster, a wee bit stronger than Wofford's. I feel like that would be the real concerning part if Josh Simon or Michael Smith aren't able to go.
Yeah, I think you even saw it at times last week. You didn't really. I know the final total looked good. You put up a lot of yards in garbage time. Wofford got tired. I understand you still rushed for 256, I think. You had one rush over 20 yards all day, and it was in the fourth quarter. You didn't really get the running game going. You were under 6 yards. I think you were under 5 yards a carry in the first half. You didn't have the explosives going. And, no, I don't think you can really have a great running game if you don't have Simon in there to block. I just don't. I don't know where that comes from. I don't know how you piece it together. Unless maybe you get Michael Smith back. I think that can help soften the blow a little bit. He's also questionable. I think this might be a game where Norris, I don't want to say win on his own, but the math gets a lot harder for how you move the ball without Simon. I think we would both agree, and especially I think the running game actually maybe takes a bigger hit in the passing game, which is weird to say about your leading receiver being out, receiving yards guy at least.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a whole lot more to get into this game as well. We'll go ahead and take a quick break. When Alan and I come back, we'll discuss maybe a potential fatal flaw in Clemson's special teams unit and what South Carolina is going to have to do defensively against Clemson to be able to make sure Clemson doesn't establish the run on them. A whole lot more to get into on this massive rivalry game on Saturday. You're listening to the Postgame Show here on The Game. Yeah, you're damn right. It's rivalry week. Only days away from one of the highly anticipated Carolina-Clemson games, at least the most anticipated one in recent memory. I'm Elijah Campbell. No Jay Phillips today. My man Alan Cole from Gamecock Scoop at Alan__Cole. The underscore so nice we put it twice, is on the line with me right now to talk about this game. And Alan, I talked about this in earlier this hour. Time flies when you're having fun. I talked about it earlier in this hour that I think there might be a fatal special teams flaw for Clemson that South Carolina can exploit. And if they do, I think it makes a world of difference in a game that I believe, and I think a lot of us believe, will be close to a one-score game for its entirety. But this Clemson team has had 6 kicks blocked this year. And upon review of the tape, 5 of those 6 block kicks came from maybe some protection issues on the left side of the line of scrimmage. Is that something that you think Shane Beamer and this staff has identified and has really looked closely at, something that they can use to maybe break this game open if needed?
Yeah, I think we've seen enough of Shane Beamer, and even without Pete Lembo, which shout out Pete Lembo, by the way, Buffalo 8-4 this year. But
they smacked up Kent State the other night.
As the new special teams coordinator, they're always looking for ways to flip a game in the third phase, to do it that way. They've got a block kick. They had blocked the punt against LSU, and am I crazy, or did they not block a field goal at some point this year, too, earlier in the year?
They blocked the PAT against Old Dominion, I think.
That's it, yep.
Yeah.
They blocked an extra point against Old Dominion, and obviously the punt against LSU. So, yeah, I think that factors in for sure. I mean, we remember 2 years ago the way special teams basically won that game for South Carolina with the 2 turnovers in the kicking game and what Kai Kroger did. Yeah, I don't know what to say other than just you might see a block kick. I'm not a special teams coordinator. I don't know what the analysis is there, but yeah, I think it's part of this for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one thing I looked at. I was like, man, Florida State does have,
at least one of those got returned for a touchdown too, because I know Virginia Tech put theirs back.
Yeah, they ran theirs back, and that was the one that was returned for a score. And I mean, Virginia Tech didn't do much after that, but that was a pretty big play to open up the scoring in that game. And I know that's a solid special teams unit. Florida State, as bad as they are this year, for a lot of the season was like number 1 or number 2 in special teams SP+. So that's something that they've done well, but at the same time, yeah, I noticed that was a little bit of a trend for Clemson, just having a lot of kicks being blocked. But, in the other phases of the game too, Shane was asked yesterday about, the Citadel running for 288 yards, and going back and doing the math, is about 5.2 yards per carry, non-sack adjusted for the Citadel. They did run the ball pretty well on Clemson, and they do run that, triple option style offense. South Carolina can at times, run a more enhanced version of that, a more elaborate unit of that, because they do have more of a downfield passing threat than schools like the Citadel. But is that something that you think this offense can really exploit in this game, or is that maybe just one of those things for Clemson that, you're playing a game against the Citadel before a game like this that maybe makes that stat line a little flukier than we think?
I think your last point there has some legs. I think rushing for almost 300 yards is not a realistic goal in almost any game. That just doesn't happen very often in college football.
Right.
So, yes, there's something to that, but also I think there's something to the fact that Clemson's run defense has had problems this year. They've had trouble outside the tackles. South Carolina can do some of the outside stuff, whether it's the things with Larvadane we've talked about in the past and some of that orbit motion, whether it's the QB power stuff with Sellers. I think this is, again, going back to the last segment, where you really need at least one of Simon or Smith back at tight end just to kind of help move the blocking game along. But, yeah, I feel better. I said this somewhere earlier in the week. I feel better about South Carolina's chances the further you get on the perimeter, just because Clemson's interior is so good. Those linebackers are both going to be NFL players. I mean, Shane said yesterday he can't wait to not have to play Barrett Carter anymore, and I can understand that.
I don't blame him. I don't blame him at all. Barrett Carter is a dude. And then on the other side of the ball, I feel like so much of this game is going to kind of hinder on the running game for both teams. And when you look at Clemson's running game, and they run for almost 200 a game. I think they're sitting about 195 right now. And Phil Moff is a tough guy to bring down. Cade Klubnik, a tough guy to bring down. And you saw what Klubnik did against Pittsburgh to win that game. Do you think Clemson's kind of taken a lot of pages out of the Missouri playbook in terms of seeing what Missouri did in terms of getting to the outside and using a lot of stretch runs and outside zone to try to pick up chunk yardage against this Carolina defense?
I don't think it's exactly the same type of playbook. I think you saw, like you said, Missouri running the gap stuff, the stretch zone, that kind of thing. I think Nate Noel's probably better outside the tackles in space than a Phil Maffa, who kind of projects, or not projects, you've seen him. He's more of a bruiser between the tackles kind of guy. And I think the one difference with this Clemson running game that maybe you've seen in years past is there's not a Will Shipley to kind of go off Phil Maffa. There's not that, I guess, thunder and lightning, as people like to call it. So I think it might be a little more between the tackles. But that being said, he's really hard to bring down one-on-one. You got to gang tackle. You got to rally out of the football. Phil Maffa one-on-one's usually not going to go well for the defense. So I think even between the tackles, Clemson can still find some success in the running game. But for me, whenever you're talking about stopping the run, it's always just the yards ain't points thing, right?
Yeah.
Phil Maffa can rush for 120. If he's not in the end zone, I don't think it matters what he does between the 20s in this game.
Certainly. And we got about a little over a minute for you right now. Big basketball game tonight for the men. They're taking on Virginia Tech, a brutal loss to Xavier where they kind of sleptwalked the first 10 minutes offensively in the second half, and that really killed them. But do you think they get on track against Virginia Tech tonight?
I'm going to say yes. This is not a good Virginia Tech team. Virginia Tech's on a 3-game losing streak. They lost their own first game in Fort Myers. They barely beat Winthrop a couple weeks ago. Yeah, if you have any designs at all on kind of righting this ship and getting back where you want this thing to be, you can't lose this game tonight.
Absolutely. Alan Call from Gamecock Scoop at Alan__Cole to follow him on Twitter. Alan, thanks for joining me again, man. Have a good Thanksgiving.
Appreciate it. You too, Elijah. See you up there Saturday.
Good stuff. Yeah, Al and I will be in the press box on Saturday. A massive game. Hour number 3 coming up next here on the Postgame Show. From the WIS Traffic Studios, I'm Elijah Campbell. The few accidents to get to you that are causing some issues on the roadways, starting with one on Gadsden Street near Hampton Street. Another accident on Highway 1 at Augusta Road, at Parkland Road and Decker Boulevard. We have an accident that has the left lane completely blocked on 26 westbound before Piney Grove Road and exit 104, causing a pretty significant traffic backup at the moment. Accident on 26 eastbound after Piney Grove Road near exit 104. Same one. Actually, I just read that twice. We have another accident on Platte Springs Road at South Lake Drive, US 176 at Broad River Road near I-20, and lastly one on 20 East right before Bush River Road near exit 63. Five o'clock news here as we kick off the final half hour of the postgame show. Ending a little early today because Derek Scott and Judge Manning are going to have the call for you as the Carolina men's basketball team will take on Virginia Tech over in Fort Myers. They're looking to bounce back after a pretty brutal loss to Xavier on Monday night to try to, salvage some positive energy after that loss and try to get at least another Power 4 win on the resume before they come back to the great state of South Carolina. But the big news from last night, the college football playoff rankings unveiled going into the final week of the regular season. Oregon leading the way once again at number 1. Ohio State in at 2. Texas, the highest ranked SEC team once again with their 10-1 ranking or record at number 3. Penn State coming in at 4. Notre Dame 5. Miami 6. Georgia 7. Tennessee 8. SMU 9, Indiana 10, Boise State 11, Clemson at 12, Alabama 13, Ole Miss 14, and at 15, your South Carolina Gamecocks. That puts you in a good position to maybe be able to sneak your way into the college football playoff. I know there's been a lot of discussion this year of whether or not a 3-loss SEC team can make themselves available to get into the college football playoff. We talked about it earlier today. A lot of things probably have to happen for that to come to fruition, but I know a lot of you are optimistic. That was our poll question of the day at 1075 The Game on Twitter. Does a win at Clemson Saturday put the Gamecocks in the college football playoff? Yes or no? We have 137 votes right now. You have 18 hours left to vote if you'd like to weigh in on this. But 46.7% of our voters say yes, 53.3% say no. A lot has to happen, again, I think, for them to be able to get in the playoff. But the first thing is to be able to win on Saturday. That's the main caveat right there, is winning on Saturday. But Saturday means a lot because it's the rivalry game, because this is such a historic game that means so much to the state of South Carolina every single year. That automatically puts a lot on the line. This is a big game if both teams even only have 4 wins on the season with no prospect of going to a bowl game. Last year we went into this game with South Carolina at 5-6, needing to beat Clemson to just get bowl eligible. This year you need to beat Clemson to have a shot at playing in the college football playoff. Oh, what a difference a year can make. But is that something that Coach Beamer talks about with his players? Is that something that they discuss internally when it comes to talking about this game on Saturday and as it relates to their positioning at the college football playoff poll? Again, Coach Beamer was asked about that yesterday, and here was his response.
No. Not that our players aren't talking about it. I don't think I need to say anything. They know. Yeah. I mean, they're not going to be in study hall tonight, Pete. They're going to be sitting around on their phones, and I'm sure they'll see the rankings come out, whatever it is, and people will be talking about it and things like that as well. So we addressed it maybe a few weeks ago. Just the thing that we needed to do is worry about what we can control, and that's winning football games. And this is no different. We don't talk about it. Not that that's the right thing. We talk about, again, none of it matters if you don't go out there and play well on Saturday. So we need to focus on playing well Saturday, and everything else takes care of itself.
Got to win on Saturday. And Shane is right. The rest will take care of itself. Whether or not you talk about it with your team a lot or not, it might be irrelevant because you got to take care of business on Saturday. As big of a game as it is, Clemson does pose a lot of great challenges. Clemson's a really good football team. Not forget that fact at all. They're 9-2 for a reason. They run the ball really well. They rush for almost 200 yards a game. They're sitting at about 195 per game, as Alan and I talked about in the last segment. This is a rushing attack led by running back Phil Maffa, who's already over 1,000 yards on the season. Cade Klubnik has some wheels as well. You saw what he can do to impact a football game with his 50-yard game-winning touchdown against Pittsburgh just a few short weeks ago. The running game is going to be a big part of what happens on Saturday, whether or not you come out with a win or a loss. I asked Shane Beamer on Tuesday, about what might you have to do to be able to limit Clemson's running game and make sure they're not able to control the terms and conditions of this game.
You've got to be able to tackle well, which is easier said than done. You know, you've got a big back in Maffa that can make you miss, but he can also run you over. So you've got to tackle well. You've got to be able to, you know, when you get an opportunity, when we're in the backfield and we get around the quarterback, we got to be able to get him on the ground as well. And I think a huge thing for us will just be takeaways. Clemson's third in the nation in turnover margin right now, third. And I know last year, I've obviously followed them closely being in the state. They weren't very good last year. They turned the ball over way too many times last season, and Dabo has said that. They're not doing that this year. That's not a knock on wood. That's like a reverse knock wood. Like you want them to turn it over, right? So you don't want to. You want them to turn it over, but they're not. I mean, I think they've only turned the ball over something like 7 times the entire season, which is crazy. I mean, that's less than 1 a game. So for us, we've got to be able to create takeaways and knock the ball out, you know, force interceptions, errant throws, whatever it might be, and then that gets them off schedule. But if you're not doing a good job tackling and you're not creating takeaways, it's going to be tough. And it's not just Maffa, it's the receivers are loads and they're hard to bring down, and they're different skill sets. Whether they make you miss, outrun you, they can do it all.
It's a really good run game, and I think he poses a really good point, too, that you're going to have to be able to force turnovers. I think to a degree, Clemson's going to be able to get what they want on the ground because they're just really good at it. That's the team's MO. They've done that all season long, and for the most part, they use that to dictate the terms and conditions of every game that they play in. So forcing turnovers is going to be massive, and that was a point of contention for the Tigers coming into this season. You can look at their season last year, and their turnover problems cost them a game against Florida State, a Florida State team that went 13-0, won the ACC championship, and was snubbed from the college football playoff. Back in the day when we only had 4 teams participating in that bad boy, right? But this Clemson team this year, to their credit, they do a lot better job at protecting the ball. But on the flip side of that coin, this Carolina team has done a very good job at forcing turnovers, whether it be strip sacks from Kyle Kennard, interceptions from guys like Nick Emmon-Worry and O'Donnell Fortune. They've done a really good job at being able to punch the ball out and force a lot of fumbles, even when the ball has moved on past the line of scrimmage. They're going to have to do a lot of that on Saturday. You're going to have to try to force some fumbles, create your own luck, and be able to change possession quickly and then take advantage of that. So if you are able to create some turnovers, would you be able to take advantage of it? And when you look at what happened with Clemson last week, you know, the run defense for the most part this season has been really solid. I really like what Clemson's got up front on the defensive side of the ball. I think they can win. They win a lot of games with their toughness on the interior. They have some dudes defensively, but the Citadel did run for 288. They did pick up 5.2 yards per carry, and that's not sack adjusted for yards per carry. Is that something that's really meaningful? Alan Cole, who joined us in the last hour, believes that, running for 288 is probably too lofty of a goal for Carolina in this game, and I tend to agree with him. I do think there might be a little bit of sleepwalking that happened in that game, the same way Carolina maybe gave up more to Wofford on Saturday than they normally would. Don't want to accuse anybody of overlooking an opponent, but that's human nature. But Shane was asked yesterday of whether or not the Citadel running for 288 against Clemson with their triple option-like attack is something that he's looking at in terms of getting the Gamecocks, getting something going on the ground game on Saturday.
Yeah, when you look at the stat sheet and you see Citadel went for that, certainly, it opens your eyes as well, and they did a nice job as well. And, parts of our offense, you guys have watched us all season. We may not be under center and look like the old wishbone, but we're doing a lot of triple option elements in our offense where here comes a receiver around and then Lenoris can either hand it to Rocket or pull it. And then if he pulls it, he can pitch it to a receiver. I mean, that's triple option, and that's what, we've been doing. So that's our offense to begin with. But, certainly you look at every game they've played this season in all three phases and break it down and find things that fit you. There's no question about it. But the Citadel came in and did a good job and running the ball. And there's elements of that we'll certainly look at. But we'll also look at elements of what, Pitt did and Virginia did and Georgia did and App State and everyone else, Wake and on and on and on that they've played this season.
12 o'clock noon on Saturday is kickoff between the South Carolina Gamecocks and the Clemson Tigers. In the NFL, there is some news made today. The Minnesota Vikings will be claiming Daniel Jones off waivers. He'll be signed to their practice squad. News because Daniel Jones has been the starting quarterback for the New York Giants all season long, and ever since he's been drafted, he has been the starting quarterback for New York, and that means the reins will be handed over what was to Tommy DeVito, but Tommy DeVito more than likely not going to be able to play tomorrow's game against the Cowboys on Thanksgiving, which means we will have a Drew Lock sighting for the New York Giants. So just what everybody wanted on Thanksgiving. Cooper Rush versus Drew Lock. Yes, I'm being facetious. Probably not an incredibly exciting game, and I'm still a little bummed out. One of the reasons why I'm a little bummed out about this is because we had a perfect chance to have Daniel Jones sign with the Cowboys, because the Cowboys aren't going to be around Dak Prescott the rest of the year. A Daniel Jones starting for the Cowboys against the Giants in the same week that he got released from the team would just be hilarious. I'm not saying it'd make for good football. I'm not saying it's what the Dallas Cowboys should have done, but as someone who is a fan of irony and humor, would have been really funny to see Daniel Jones in a Cowboys uniform play against the Giants on Thanksgiving and at least give that game a little bit of juice. Because as it stands right now, that's the snoozer game for tomorrow. Out of all the three games being played tomorrow, I think that's the one where it's safe to say that's the one you're going to have to take your post-meal nap in. Continue with our 5 o'clock news here, presented by Integrated Media. Our friends over at Integrated Media who do a really good job hooking us up with our video system and help fuel the game TV. We have a big basketball game tonight. The reason that this show is going off the air at 5:30 is because Derek Scott and Judge Manning are going to have you on the call for South Carolina versus Virginia Tech. Al and I talked about it a little bit in the last segment. Gamecocks with a loss to Xavier need to salvage a little bit of joy here in Fort Myers and leave with at least one win. They take on Virginia Tech, who's really struggled this year. The Hokies are ranked 344 in the country in turnover percentage. Maybe that's something South Carolina can be able to exploit, be able to force some turnovers, create some easy buckets. Carolina really needing a win after the loss to Xavier, and you look at the rest of the non-conference slate, isn't necessarily posing a ton of opportunity to get some key wins. Ever since you lost to North Florida at the beginning of the season, you're kind of put behind the 8 ball in terms of building a resume that's going to be ideal for the selection committee coming up in March whenever we get to that point of the season. But then you lose to Indiana by double digits on the road, a game in which you trailed almost the entire time, and then losing the game to Xavier, a game that you were in control of during the first half, but a bad start to the second half cost you. It also doesn't help you a lot today that Indiana got boat raced by Louisville in the first game of the Battle for Atlantis tournament. That's not a good look. Need a win against Virginia Tech tonight to really help that out. You do have Boston College on Tuesday on the road for your SEC ACC Challenge. And then, of course, Clemson comes in on December 17th. You'll be hosting them. Clemson, who's a pretty solid basketball team themselves. They lost P.J. Hall, but they got a lot of good pieces coming back. Their only loss so far this year coming against Boise State, but they're fresh off of a win last night, a 75-67 win against Penn State. And before you say Elijah, it's Penn State basketball. They're not any good. False. I think Penn State has a chance to maybe run the table and win the Big Ten. I wouldn't be surprised if they do. Just a team to monitor. That's the 5 o'clock news, brought to you by Integrated Media. More to come. We'll take a drive around the SEC. Since we're going off the air a little earlier, we'll take a drive around the SEC, look at some of the games on Rivalry Week, and what those games will mean for South Carolina's chances at squeaking into the college football playoff, again, if they were to beat Clemson. All that and more as you're listening to the Postgame Show right here on The Game. Quick drive around the SEC here as this is our final segment of the postgame show. I'm Elijah Campbell leading you up into our coverage at 5:30 of the Gamecocks men's basketball team taking on Virginia Tech in the Fort Myers tip-off. And what better way to start our drive around the SEC, brought to you by Herndon Chevy, than a little bit of a score update right now. Auburn basketball playing, their men's team playing in the championship game of the Maui Invitational. They've been on an absolute tear, man. Janai Broome gives them a win at the buzzer against Iowa State. They win in a really close game, and they took care of business yesterday against North Carolina. They're up on Memphis right now. It's 20-11 last I saw. They just went to commercial break, so I missed it. But they're up 20-11 on Memphis. I expect them to take care of business right there. And look, I mean, I'm really high on Alabama this year too, but that Auburn team might be the toughest in all college basketball. And, if we gave out postseason awards for the first, 2 weeks or 3 weeks of the college basketball season, Janai Broome might be your player of the year. Some guy to watch going down the stretch. But it's a massive, massive weekend in the SEC, including some games that might help out the South Carolina Gamecocks and their chances at getting into the college football playoff. Tommy texted us on our Firehouse Subs text line, 803-404-6100. He says, other than the obvious, Carolina beating Clemson and Ole Miss and Alabama losing, what other teams help Carolina the most by losing? And that is where we will start because, Tommy, I firmly believe that if Vanderbilt beats Tennessee, you might not need Ole Miss and Alabama to lose. I think you might be able to leapfrog them by virtue of beating a number 12 Clemson team on the road, especially if Clemson's able to backdoor their way into an ACC championship game by virtue of SMU losing to Cal or Miami losing to Syracuse. I think that would hold a lot of weight, and heaven forbid Clemson end up winning the ACC. Then that would look really good because then you have a win against a team that got into the college football playoff. That would help a ton. But, Tommy, when I look at it, this Tennessee-Vanderbilt game would be a massive swing because I think that's an eliminator for Tennessee. A Tennessee loss to a five-loss Vanderbilt team would be all but disqualifying because it'd be their second loss in the last 3 weeks. That matters. If you beat Clemson, then you've won 6 games in a row. Tennessee will have lost 2 in 3 weeks. And the offense shouldn't pass anyone on that committee's, air quotes, eye test because they have not looked great all season long. And if you look at the common foe factors between South Carolina and Tennessee, one could point to, if Tennessee and South Carolina have the same record, well, Tennessee beat Alabama and South Carolina lost to Alabama. Yes, that's a massive win for Tennessee. But the Alabama win alone isn't enough to carry as much weight because since then, Alabama has also lost to Oklahoma on the road. And didn't just lose to Oklahoma. I know this was, not that long ago, but if you need a refresher, they got beat 24-3 at Oklahoma. South Carolina's defense scored more touchdowns than Alabama's offense when they played in Norman. Just throwing that part out there. But take that out, too. Look at the other common foes that South Carolina and Tennessee have between the two of them. If Tennessee loses to Vanderbilt, then you can easily look at what South Carolina did to Vanderbilt, which is beating them over the head with a bag of hammers for 4 quarters and beating them by 3 touchdowns. And then you look at the Kentucky game. Tennessee took a lot out of Tennessee to beat Kentucky. They even trailed early, and they didn't pass the ball very well. They won 28-18, and the game felt a little tighter than that. When you played Kentucky on the road in September, you took the crowd out of the game early, you beat them 31-6, left 0 doubt, and made it pretty obvious that you have one of the best defenses, especially one of the best edge rushing combos in the country in Dylan Stewart and Kyle Kennard, and you beat the hell out of them for 4 quarters. I think that means a lot. And then the Oklahoma game as well. Tennessee really had to go to the Iowa playbook by running the ball and kind of smothering the game out that way and winning by 10 in what was a pretty close game towards the end. Oklahoma made a push, but you dominated Oklahoma in a manner in which this game felt over by the second commercial break. You were up 21-0 by the time we got to the 9-minute mark and had to make Oklahoma panic and change their quarterbacks just 3 drives into the game. So when looking at those two teams, I do believe if it comes down to Tennessee and South Carolina to put in a 3-loss SEC team in the playoff, the committee might be a little more favorable to South Carolina's cause. Other games going on this weekend, though. Friday night, it's a real shame that this game isn't being played tomorrow. Mississippi State at Ole Miss, 3:30 on ABC or ESPN+. This game's going to be played on Black Friday. Instead, it'll be played while we are on air. Jay and I on Friday. We will have a show on Friday. Ole Miss, I think, should win that one by a lot. Mississippi State is kind of a lost cause this year, a real year zero for Jeff Lebby and the Bulldogs. And then at night, 7:30, good old-fashioned hate, Georgia hosting Georgia Tech. Georgia, a pretty big favorite, 19.5-point favorite according to ESPN Bet. That one's tomorrow night as well. Looking forward to see that one because don't sleep on Georgia Tech. They've upset a lot of people this year. Tennessee at Vanderbilt, of course, the game I alluded to earlier is going to be a noon kick on ABC on Saturday. Carolina Clemson, a noon kick. Louisville will be playing at Kentucky at noon as well. And then starting at 3:30, Auburn at Alabama. Alabama, an 11.5-point favorite. Don't sleep on Auburn. The Iron Bowl can get weird, man, and that would behoove South Carolina for Auburn to win that game. And then, of course, 3:30 Arkansas at Missouri, and then 7 o'clock Florida at Florida State. We'll go ahead and sign off for now. Coming up next, Derek Scott and Judge Manning live from Fort Myers, South Carolina, takes on Virginia Tech. This has been the Postgame Show here on The Game.